Assalamu alaikum. In this video, I'm going to present an evidential argument proving Islam being true prima facie. Now, prima facie just means at first glance. So, given the data we have, Islam is going to be rationally preferable to its alternatives. Now, specifically, the claim that Muhammad was divinely commissioned by God. And this is not going to be an argument from faith or like spiritual experience. It's going to be structured around an epistemic probability framework. Basically, which hypothesis better explains the fact. So I will argue that Muhammad being divinely commissioned by God is going to be the best explanation for a set of facts I will cover in this video. So let's get into it. So the whole argument follows the model developed by Paul Draper, who is an atheist philosopher famous for his evidential problem of evil for atheism. So according to Draper, epistemic probability works like this. Relative to an epistemic situation K, proposition P is going to be more probable than Q just in case any full rational agent in K would assign a higher degree of belief to P than Q. So put simply, if some fact is less surprising on hypothesis P than on hypothesis Q, then P is the better explanation for that fact, all else being equal. So here's a clean version of the argument for why I believe Islam is true. So if an observation O is less surprising on HCC than on NC, then HCC better explains O. Observation O is less surprising on HCC than on NC, therefore HCC is the better explanation of O, and consequently Islam is prima facie true. So you might ask, what are HCC and NC? So HCC is the hypothesis of divine commission, that Muhammad was divinely appointed to fulfill God's salvific purposes. So to like bring it about that humans come into a better personal relationship with God and each other, assuming that God is going to be omnibenevolent. So NC, the hypothesis of non-commission, that he wasn't appointed to fulfill God's salvific purposes. So he could be like sincere, mistaken, fraud, could be in delusion, or even that no God exists. It doesn't really matter. It's just that Muhammad wasn't divinely commissioned by God to fulfill his salvific purposes. Now, to make this intuitive, or to better elaborate on this, here's going to be an analogy for the epistemic probability framework I'm going to be invoking. So like imagine your friend Zaid. You don't know if he drinks coffee at home. So there's going to be two hypotheses. Hypothesis A, Zaid drinks coffee at home, or hypothesis B, Zaid doesn't. Now you walk into his kitchen and see a coffee machine and a bag of beans. Like you see a bag of beans and a coffee machine. That's your observation. Clearly that's going to be less surprising on A than B. Like if he drinks coffee at home, having those items makes sense. Like if he drinks coffee at home, it makes sense to have like a coffee machine and a bag of beans. Now under hypothesis B, if he doesn't, that's a weird coincidence. So even without exact stats, he rationally prefer A. It's going to be prima facie more probable. So that's the exact move we are going to make with Islam. We're now going to apply this logic to create historical cultural observation. O1 is going to be Muhammad sparked a mass unifying movement. So 7th century Arabia was like shredded. There was no centralized governance, tribal warfare, there was deep religious disunity. Like non-Muslim sources like CBS, the 7th century bishop, describe how even attempts by Jews to form alliances with Arabs failed because their religious skills were too different. Then Muhammad, a merchant outsider, shows up, and within a generation, he unites the whole Arabian Peninsula around a single theistic worldview or not. In pre-Islamic Arabia, the Jews and Arabs couldn't unite because their religious skills were too different. It was like a deep religious disunity, which I just mentioned. So when Muhammad shows up, he unites the whole Arabian Peninsula around a single theistic worldview or not. So even in Medina, as Montgomery or whatnots, Muhammad initially held no real political power. He was just a respected arbitrator. So if NC is true, if he was just a god, it's very surprising. Then under HCC, they would just fit. A divinely commissioned prophet might be expected to overcome deep tribal religious barriers as he could influence hearts and mind. So O1 is less surprising on the HCC. And another thing to note is that Muhammad was persecuted and fled to Medina to seek refuge from the severe persecution he faced in Medina, all because of him challenging the tribal and religious status quo. It would have been strategically better for him to not have done that, so this raised the probability that he was in fact divinely commissioned. So O2, observation 2, is going to be that the Quran transformed the Arabic language. Before Islam, Arabic was largely oral, poetry dominated. There was no structured literary tradition. Then the Quran was revealed, and suddenly, like Arabic becomes like a literary language. It spans grammar, calligraphy, theology, and hermeneutics. Scholars like William Graham and David Kermani say the Quran liberated Arabic poetry from existing genres. So the Quran liberated Arabic poetry from existing genres. Alexander Knish calls it a shift from intuition and improvisation to study and contemplation. So this kind of deep linguistic transformation from someone unlettered in an oral culture would be like unexpected under HC, especially since Muhammad wasn't even trained in literary arts. He didn't have like formal education. In the HDC, where God's message is meant to persist and language becomes like a vehicle for long-term transmission, that outcome is entirely coherent. So again, O2 is going to be way less surprising under HDC, and hence HDC is going to be rationally preferable. And so O3, observation 3, in the Quran presents a more exemplar in Joseph. So Surah Yusuf is unique for two reasons. It gives a complete narrative of a single figure, Joseph, and it calls it the best of stories. Now the way Joseph is portrayed maps exactly onto the 5 traits that moral psychologists like Colby and Demon associate with moral exemplars. So sustained moral commitment, acting with integrity under pressure, self-sacrifice, inspirational character, and humility. Joseph forgives, reconciles, resists ego, all traits counter to pre-Islamic tribal values which emphasize revenge and honor. So like Joseph, he lives as like a servant in the royal family, believing in or holding to Abrahamic monotheism. He has the ability to betray his leader, but he abstains from it, holding fast to his values. He gets put in prison unjustly, but he doesn't like seek revenge. When he's released, he tries to seek reconciliation with those who have wronged him, etc., etc. So Helmer Ringren even writes to abstain from vengeance was a crime in that context, but the Quran flips that. Joseph endures, forgives, reconciles. So this radical moral reorientation is more surprising than HC, unless we posit like an uncommonly like visionary ethical genius. But like it fits perfectly under HEC. So O3, like the others, is going to be less surprising under HEC. So there are some objections and responses people have offered to this argument. So the first objection is that like pertaining to observation 1, couldn't there be like naturalistic explanations like with Alexander the Great? So first of all, the question isn't whether like a natural explanation exists, but which hypothesis better explains the data. And Muhammad's resistance to the tribal religious status quo made the success harder, not easier. And even if some aspects are like naturally explicable, that's compatible with HEC. God can work through natural means, so they wouldn't even defeat the argument. Objection 2 is that isn't the Quran's influence due to people believing it was divine. So the argument doesn't even presuppose the Quran's divine origin. It only tracks observed effects, linguistic enrichment, cultural shift, literary impact, which can be appreciated even by secular scholars. You can cite Graham and Karmani, who argue that the Quran reshaped literary genres. That's an intrinsic property. It's not going to be one derived from belief. So, and also, Arbery describes it as its aesthetic powers like an inimitable symphony. I've cited this quote in my previous video as well, where I also presented compelling evidence for the truthfulness of Islam. So that would point to literary features, not just belief-based ones. And objection 3 is, what about problematic verse in the Quran on Muhammad's moral record? So the argument isn't even claiming for moral perfection, it's evidential, not hagiographic. So historical criticisms of Muhammad are also going to be complicated by conflicting records. So and HCC only requires that he was divinely commissioned, not necessarily perfect in every act. And even transformative figures can be like morally complex. It doesn't negate their broader role. And there are more responses to these kind of objections. But to sum it up, we have like 3 major historical and cultural observations. And in this video, I argued that these historical and cultural observations are less surprising under the hypothesis that Muhammad was divinely commissioned by God, which makes it more rationally preferable or epistemically preferable given or epistemic probability framework of Paul Draper, which I invoked in this video. So and which I gave an example of. So each is less surprising if Muhammad was divinely commissioned than if he wasn't. According to Paul Draper's epistemic framework, that means the hypothesis of divine commission is going to be more epistemically probable, prima facie. It's a rational evidential case that makes Islamic theism worthy of belief. So if you found this video helpful, like, share, let me know if you want more videos related to this topic. So assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.